As Subaru turned to follow Amelia, he barely had time to register the doorframe before. Crack! A sharp, resounding thud rang through the grand corridor as his forehead collided with the solid, unyielding wood. Pain exploded across his skull, a searing bolt of white-hot agony that surged through his nerves. His vision burst into a sea of blinding light, the world tilting violently beneath him as if the very ground had turned traitor. A shrill, grating ring filled his ears, drowning out everything else. He reeled backward, instinctively clutching his forehead, his fingers pressing into the quickly swelling point of impact. The smooth lacquered wood had been utterly unmoved by his suffering, standing firm and impassive as if mocking his carelessness. His other hand flailed in the air before grasping the nearest support, the cool, stone wall at his side. A sharp, pained breath hissed through his clenched teeth. Ha! By the gods, what manner of treacherous sorcery is this? The doorframe, resolute in its silence, remained indifferent. The moments stretched, long enough for Subaru's dazed senses to register more than just his own suffering. The scent of the plush carpet beneath him, thick with the faint fragrance of lavender and something earthier, perhaps sandalwood, mingled with the subtle aroma of polished oak and the lingering traces of candle wax. The golden light streaming in through the arched windows cast long, dappled patterns across the floor, catching the dust motes suspended in the still air. Even in his pain, he could feel the warmth where the sun's rays kissed the rich wooden panels, the contrast stark against the cool shadows lingering beneath the chandeliers above. Then, there was the sound, or rather, the attempt at not making a sound. A breath, sharp and restrained, the whisper of fabric shifting, the faintest tremor of amusement, barely swallowed down. His vision still blurred, Subaru turned, squinting past the ache in his skull, and there they were. Ram stood composed, arms crossed, the very picture of poised indifference, save for the telltale twitch at the corner of her lips. Her crimson eye gleamed, her amusement barely contained behind a carefully crafted mask of neutrality. Rem, ever the model of grace, had folded her hands neatly before her, her expression as serene as a painting. Yet, despite her best efforts, there it was, the faintest crinkle at the edges of her eyes, the gentle quiver of her lips betraying the mirth that threatened to spill forth. And then there was Amelia, the greatest traitor of them all. The half-elf had turned away entirely, delicate shoulders trembling, her silver hair quivering as she pressed a hand to her mouth in a futile attempt to smother her laughter. The sunlight that poured through the high windows bathed her in a halo of gold, making her look positively angelic, if angels were the type to take amusement in the suffering of others. Subaru's fingers curled into a fist. His pride, already wounded, now lay thoroughly battered beneath the crushing weight of their silent mirth. "Are you amused?" His voice, sharp and laced with injured dignity, sliced through the air like a blade unsheathed. Ram exhaled, a single sharp breath through her nose. Perish the thought, dear guest. Rem inclined her head, blue eyes shimmering with carefully measured politeness. "We would never dare find amusement in your misfortune, dear guest." "Never," Ram echoed, her voice a little too smooth, her amusement no longer concealed. Subaru's scowl deepened, his throbbing forehead doing little to restore his battered dignity. The mansion itself, bathed in soft golden light, seemed to revel in his suffering. Even the air smelled richer, like ancient books and fine tea, as if the very atmosphere had conspired to remind him that this place was above him. Amelia made a sound, one that was distinctly not a cough but could not quite be called anything else. It was soft, barely there, yet to Subaru's ears, it may as well have been a triumphant fanfare at his expense. He exhaled slowly through his nose, drawing in the air of the mansion, the subtle trace of lavender woven into the fabric of the curtains, the lingering warmth of the afternoon sun as it filtered through tall, arched windows. There was a faint spice of polished mahogany beneath it all, mingling with the scent of aged books and candle wax, a quiet reminder of the grandeur that pressed in from every side. With what little dignity remained to him, as much as a man who had just headbutted a doorframe could possibly muster, Subaru straightened. The dull ache at his forehead pulsed in time with his wounded pride, but he ignored both. Instead, he lifted his chin, exuding the composure of a man who had not just been betrayed by architecture. With deliberate ceremony, he ducked, properly, this time, and stepped through the treacherous doorway, his boots sinking into the thick carpet beyond. It was rich beneath his soles, the fibers plush, yet dense enough to carry the weight of generations. There was a warmth to it, a muted softness that drank in the light, the golden glow of the sun stretching across its embroidered surface like liquid amber. And then, as he moved further into the hallway, The sheer scale of it unfolded around him. The ceilings soared impossibly high, their beams carved with intricate patterns, gilded edges catching the sunlight and casting delicate, shimmering shadows upon the walls. The scent of lacquered wood grew stronger here, mingling with something older. The quiet presence of time itself settled into every polished surface. Yet, for reasons entirely beyond mortal comprehension, the chandeliers loomed at a height that was neither practical nor entirely safe. His gaze trailed upward, following the way the delicate crystals refracted the sunlight, scattering fragmented rainbows across the floor. But then his eyes drifted downward, toward them. The realization struck him like a second blow to the head. This house was built for small people. Amelia, gliding ahead, barely reached his waist. The twin maids, even shorter. This entire estate, this grand, opulent mansion of supposed prestige and renown, was nothing more than an elaborate death trap for any man who stood with even an ounce of greatness. His fingers brushed against his still throbbing forehead. No wonder they walked these halls with such ease. The treacherous beams and dangerously low chandeliers posed no threat to them. They are unburdened by the trials of stature. And he alone, must bear the weight of the sun's blessing. A slow smirk curled across his lips, wry amusement flickering in his gaze. Something amuses you, dear guest? Ram's voice cut through the quiet, smooth and sharp as a blade wrapped in silk. Subaru turned to her, his smirk widening as he met her stare with an easy, practiced confidence. The light caught her crimson eye, but she did not blink, watching him with that same poised, knowing air. Oh, nothing at all, he mused, slipping his hands into the pockets of his jacket as though he had not just suffered an indignity. Only pondering how the world itself seems determined to test me. It is, after all, the burden of those who stand above to suffer the inconveniences of the small. Rem's polite smile did not waver, though her fingers curled just a fraction tighter around the hem of her apron. How fortunate, then, she said, voice ever so sweet, that you, dear guest, are so accustomed to suffering. Subaru chuckled, low and amused. A most gracious observation, dear Rem. Amelia groaned. Subaru, please, can we not do this every 5 seconds? He placed a hand over his chest, mock offense painted across his face. Dearest Lady Amelia, you wound me. I do nothing but exist, and yet even that is too much. You antagonize them constantly, she deadpanned. I prefer the term, established dominance. I prefer the term, stop before they kill you. Ram exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. A fool with an ego inflated beyond reason. How tiring. Rem smiled, though the warmth never quite reached her eyes. Sister, should he continue to speak in such a manner, I fear we will be forced to remove his tongue for the sake of Lord Roswaal's dignity. Subaru sighed, gaze shifting to the sunlight-drenched hallway ahead, where dust motes swirled in golden beams, their movement slow and deliberate, as if time itself were unhurried here. A house too small for him. A world too eager to humble him. And 3 women too quick to remind him of both. Truly, suffering was his constant companion. Subaru faltered. You're joking, right? Neither maid answered. Right? Silence stretched between them, thick as the polished wood beneath his feet. The scent of varnish lingered in the air, warm and faintly sharp, mixing with the sun-warmed fabric of the drapes swaying gently along the corridor. The gold embroidery caught the light, gleaming against the deep reds and midnight blues of the walls, a quiet testament to wealth and age. Amelia sighed, already turning toward the heavy doors at the end of the hall. The sound of her footsteps barely disturbed the plush carpet, soft and thick enough to swallow the weight of her movement. Enough of this. Let's go. Roswaal's waiting. Subaru, sensing that perhaps, he had overindulged his wit for one evening, wisely chose to follow without another word. The fibers of the carpet pressed against his soles, grounding him, the warmth of the sun spilling across it like molten gold. There was a quiet hum in the air, the kind that lived in old places, where time settled into the wood and whispered through the halls. And yet, even as they walked, his smirk remained. Let them be irritated. Let them be frustrated. It mattered little. Because at the end of the day, it was his name that filled this house with sound. His voice that stirred the still air, unsettling the dust motes that danced lazily in the sunbeams. His presence that left ripples in the silence, pressing against the aged walls and echoing in the space between footsteps. And if this Roswaal was truly the towering pillar of power they claimed him to be, then Subaru would see it with his own eyes, and judge him accordingly. As they continued down the hall, Subaru found himself adjusting his stride, navigating the treacherous floorboards beneath his feet. The old wood groaned with every step, its voice deep and resonant, as if complaining about the presence of someone so unaccustomed to its quirks. Unlike the sisters ahead, who moved with practiced ease, their steps featherlight, he bore the full brunt of the mansion's aged temperament. The silence between them was not total. Though Amelia and the maids did not speak, there was a distinct sound that lingered in the air, stifled giggles. Subaru narrowed his eyes, his pride bristling. "Is there something funny?" he asked, tone laced with feigned innocence. "No," Ram replied smoothly, her voice as effortless as a knife sliding into its sheath. "Nothing at all." Rem, ever the picture of politeness, followed her sister's words with a gentle smile. "Though, dear guest, it is rather impressive how thoroughly you announce your presence with every step. I do believe the entire estate is now aware of your arrival." Subaru scoffed, tilting his chin upward as if to reclaim some of his lost dignity. "TCH. Is it a crime to walk with the authority of a man destined for greatness?" Amelia, walking slightly ahead, sighed in exasperation. "Subaru, you tripped 3 times in the last hallway. If that's authority, then maybe you should try being a little less authoritative." "I was conducting structural integrity tests," Subaru countered, adjusting his jacket with an air of self-importance. "It is my solemn duty as a guest to ensure that these halls do not collapse under the weight of true magnificence." Ram exhaled sharply, the ghost of a smirk tugging at her lips. "Oh, how foolish of us not to realize. Truly, the mansion is honored to be graced by such magnificence." Rem tilted her head, a polite curiosity in her gaze. "Dear guest, if the mansion does collapse under your magnificence, would that not imply a tragic lack of structural competence on your part?" Subaru faltered, his mouth opening, then closing, his brain scrambled for a counterattack. Amelia chuckled softly, covering her mouth with her fingers. "You walked right into that one." "I let her have that one," Subaru declared, crossing his arms. "Because, as a gentleman, I believe in the importance of charity." Ram hummed, a rare quality in a fool. As they finally reached the dining room, Amelia stepped in first, followed by the maids, who glided through with ease. Subaru, however, faced yet another challenge. The doorway. He slowed his pace, eyeing the archway as if it were an adversary. With exaggerated caution, he ducked properly this time, stepping through with an over-practiced grace. The moment he straightened, finding himself unburdened by architectural sabotage, he let out a victorious sigh. "Ah, at last, a room befitting my stature." He spread his arms, taking in the grand space. No obstacles, no threats, just a fine dining room where a man can breathe. As Subaru straightened, victorious in his battle against the doorway, he took a moment to fully absorb the dining room's grandeur. The walls were lined with intricate wood paneling, dark and rich, exuding an air of refinement that almost felt too dignified for him to exist within. A massive chandelier hung overhead, casting a golden glow across the long, polished table. The air smelled faintly of aged wood, the fabric of the drapes, and something warm, spiced, indulgent, the unmistakable scent of a meal waiting to be served. But what truly caught his attention wasn't the lavish decor. It was him, seated at the very end of the absurdly long dining table, lounging with an ease that spoke of complete ownership of the space, was Roswaal L. Mathers. The man was a sight, clad in an ostentatious, mismatched ensemble of deep purples and blues, his face painted in a way that was both theatrical and unsettling. His mismatched eyes gleamed with something unreadable, his chin resting against his palm as he observed their entrance with the air of a cat watching a particularly amusing mouse. Subaru came to a halt, gaze locking onto Roswaal's. For a brief second, he simply stared. Then, lips curling upward, he let out a soft, almost disbelieving chuckle. "So, that's the guy, huh?" he murmured, half to himself. Ram, already moving to take her place at the side of the room, glanced at him. "Did you expect someone else?" Subaru shrugged, stepping further into the room. "Honestly, I was picturing something a little less circus ringmaster and a little more noble overlord." A low, rolling laugh filled the space. "Ooh, howda, Leite, full," Roswaal drawled, his voice lilting with an unnatural rhythm, stretching and bending syllables like he was playing with them. "I see our guist is a man of bold first impressions." Subaru smirked, slipping his hands into his pockets as he made his way to his seat. "What can I say? It's a talent." Amelia, already seated, gave Subaru a pointed look. "Please don't start something before dinner." "Who, me?" Subaru pressed a hand to his chest in mock offense. "I would never." Ram let out a quiet sigh, as if already resigning herself to the fact that the next hour would be filled with nothing but foolishness. Rem, meanwhile, simply smiled, polite, practiced, betraying nothing. Roswaal, for his part, remained lounging in his chair, his unreadable gaze locked onto Subaru. Well then, he mused, lips twitching upward. Shall we begin?